January 26th, 1966, Australia Day. Seagulls, transistor radios, the hum of a hot Adelaide morning. 3 children from Somerton Park walked to Glenelg Beach and never came home. I'm Arnna Ward, and today we're going back to that ordinary morning that became one of Australia's longest cold cases, the disappearance of Jane, Arnna and Grant Beaumont. Michael, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Elena. It's good to be here. This case sits at the crossroads of social history and policing practice in Australia. The way communities and law enforcement responded then shaped decades of change.
So, let's set the scene first. Adelaide in the mid-1960s. It was a summer heatwave on Australia Day. Families piled into Glenelg to escape the heat. Kids went to the beach unsupervised far more than they do now. There was this widespread belief nothing like that happens here. The Beaumonts were part of that ordinary post-war suburban life. Can you paint that picture for listeners, Michael?
Absolutely. Mid-1960s Australia is often remembered as relaxed and communal. Low recorded crime, close neighbourhood ties, children roaming local streets and parks. Glenelg was one of those familiar places, the sandy beach, the jetty, Collie Reserve with its sprinklers and shade, shops along Mosley Street and Jetty Road. For many families, a short bus ride to Glenelg was a routine part of childhood, and the Beaumont children were no exception.
Right. And the Beaumont family themselves, Jim and Nancy and their 3 kids, they were a working-class, stable family. Jim was a former serviceman and worked as a taxi driver turned travelling salesman. Nancy was a full-time mother. Their home was 109 Harding Street in Somerton Park, only about 3 kilometres from Glenelg. They were ordinary people, which makes the whole thing all the more devastating.
Yes, and the children, Jane was 9, Arnna 7, and little Grant just 4. Jane was described as responsible. She was trusted to look after her siblings. Arnna was outgoing and energetic, and Grant was cheeky and adored by his sisters. They had taken the bus to Glenelg before. The route and the place were familiar to them.
Yes, you can almost picture them. Towels, a few shillings for the kiosk, excited to be at their favourite patch of beach. On January 25, Jim had taken them to Glenelg, and on the morning of the 26th, the children asked Nancy if they could go again. She agreed and gave them bus fare and a little spending money. That's the last ordinary parental act we have on record.
Exactly. Nancy's last clear sighting of them was at the bus stop in Somerton Park, and the accounts put their departure in the morning. Sources vary between about 8:45 a.m. and 10 a.m, but everyone agrees they left that morning for Glenelg. A local postman later said he saw them getting off the bus, laughing and holding hands. Small, ordinary details that make what follows so wrenching.
And then the witnesses on the beach. There were multiple sightings of the children playing in the shallows, and later at Collie Reserve, running through sprinklers, having fun. Crucially, they were seen with a tall, thin-faced man, mid-30s, tanned, short, fair to light brown hair, wearing what witnesses described as swimwear. He wasn't furtive. Witnesses described him as confident and comfortable with the children. Michael, how did that observation shape the investigation?
That man's presence became central. Over 50 people later reported seeing the children with a man matching similar descriptions: tall, mid-30s, medium build, tanned, short fair hair. Police developed a composite sketch from witnesses. The difficulty, though, was that so many sightings were likely of the same episodes observed by different people, and media coverage then and afterward may have shaped recollections. Still, the consistent detail that an adult male was seen interacting comfortably with the children focused police attention on the possibility of abduction by someone who knew how to gain a child's trust.
Right. And here's one of those odd, specific moments that the public remembers. Jane went into Wenzel's Cakes on Mosley Street and bought pies, buns and soft drinks. The baker recalled that the children seemed relaxed and ordered enough food for 4. But here's the detail that has haunted investigators. Jane paid with a £1 note, even though Nancy had only given the children small change. That discrepancy suggested the man had given them different money or had taken and replaced their coins. That single transaction is one of the clearest threads in the early timeline.
Yes, it's a crucial detail. In an era when a parent would give shillings as spending money, seeing Jane use a pound note was unusual, and it tied into later witness reports of a man claiming a purse had been stolen. Whether he gave them the money or took and replaced what they had, that interaction implies direct contact and influence over the children shortly before they vanished. Those small transactional facts can be as telling as any forensic clue, except in this case.
And then after around 12:15 to 12:30 p.m, they were seen walking away from the reserve with that man. That's essentially the last confirmed reliable sighting. After 12:30 p.m, there's no verified trace. The day went from ordinary to panic by the afternoon.
The hours after are important to remember. Nancy expected them back by either noon or 2, accounts vary, but when they missed buses and didn't return, concern grew. Jim returned early from his sales trip that afternoon after Nancy called him, and they began combing Glenelg themselves. By early evening, the couple had reported the children missing to Glenelg police, and a coordinated search began. The police logs show the children were officially recorded as missing by about 7:20 p.m, and searches expanded into the night.
The scale of the search was enormous for the time. Sandhills, dunes, drains, sheds. The Partawalonga boat haven was even drained on January 29th after a woman reported speaking to children who might have been the Beaumonts. No trace.
Volunteers, police, army reservists, boats. It became one of Australia's biggest manhunts to that point. Media coverage escalated quickly too, and within days headlines feared a sex crime. That public anxiety produced a flood of sightings and tips, some genuine leads, some accidental misidentifications, some outright hoaxes. It complicated a resource-strained investigation in the mid-1960s.
And then there were the eerie elements that followed. A phone call to a woman saying their children were safe but wouldn't be returned. And 2 years later, letters that haunted the Beaumonts. Let's talk about the phone call briefly. The record is sketchy, yes?
Yes. The accounts indicate that shortly after the disappearance, there was at least one phone call from a man asserting he had the children and that they were safe but would not be returned. The line went dead before it could be traced. Telephone tracing then was rudimentary. Such calls are also commonly hoaxes in high-profile cases. Investigators treated it seriously, but it led nowhere definitive.
And the letters, those really reopened wounds. Around 2 years later, the Beaumonts received letters, some written in a child's hand, others from an adult claiming to be the man. The letters claimed the children were alive, living with a man and happy, and even said, "Don't look for us." For a family, that must have been cruel.
Cruel is the right word. One of the adult letters even arranged a meeting. Police staked out the location under cover and nobody showed. At the time, the letters contained enough detail about the children's personalities and events of the day that police considered the possibility of first-hand knowledge. Those letters offered a flicker of hope that turned into another form of torment.
Decades later, forensic analysis found that the letters were a hoax written by a man in Victoria who said he did it as a joke when he was a teenager. He reportedly had no real connection to the Beaumonts. That revelation, it strips away even the last sliver of hope the family might have had that the children were alive.
It does, and it illustrates a tragic phenomenon. Hoaxes and false confessions compound the grief of families and can divert investigative resources.
From a policing perspective, a high-profile case attracts every kind of attention, sincere, misguided, and malicious, and separating signal from noise is a long, painful process.
There are also those fragmentary leads that never solidified. In 1968, 2 young boys were found lost, and one supposedly whispered, "The man who took us, he took the Beaumonts too." But the source material cautions we should treat that as unproven, possibly second-hand retellings. How do investigators treat those kinds of anecdotal whispers?
Carefully. Anecdotes like that can point to something real, or they can arise from suggestion, conflation, or memory contamination. Investigators would log and follow up such leads, but without corroboration, they remain one more thread among many. In a case like this, decades later, memories fade and stories accrete layers of uncertainty, which is why forensic evidence and contemporaneous documentation are so valuable.
Let's shift to suspects. We have the enduring, unnamed, tall man seen with the children, the central figure in most retellings. Then, decades later, names like Harry Phipps, Derek Percy, Bevan von Einem, and others come up. We must be careful here. No one has ever been charged. But can we go through why certain people became persons of interest and why none stuck? Start with the tall man.
The tall man is the core puzzle. Multiple witnesses described a man in his mid-30s, tall, thin face, tanned, short fair hair, wearing swimwear and acting confidently around the children. He may have appeared familiar to the kids or been skilled at quickly gaining their trust. That composite image generated numerous tips, but after decades, no identity was established and no one matching the composite was proven to be the abductor.
Then there's Harry Phipps, the so-called Satin Man in later books. He lived close to Glenelg, was a wealthy factory owner, and family and neighbourhood allegations later suggested suspicious behaviour. His son alleged seeing the Beaumont children in the family yard on January 26th, and there were reports he paid 2 youths to dig a large hole at a factory site around that time, leading to major excavations at the Castelloy site in 2013, 2018, and again in 2025. Yet the digs found nothing.
Right. Phipps became a focus much later, partly because of proximity and circumstantial accounts like his supposed casual handing out of £1 notes and his family's claims. The excavations at the Castelloy site were thorough, using ground-penetrating radar and forensic teams, but no human remains or conclusive evidence linked him to the Beaumonts. He died in 2004 and was never charged. So while the theory draws on a cluster of suspicious elements, it remains circumstantial.
And then Derek Percy, a convicted murderer suspected in multiple child deaths. He was examined as a possibility because of his record and the pattern of offences, but investigators concluded he had an alibi for Australia Day 1966, and no definitive link was established. He died in prison in 2013. That was one of those leads that seemed plausible but couldn't be proven.
Percy's case shows how investigators must weigh past offences against hard timelines. Having committed crimes elsewhere doesn't prove involvement here, especially if contemporaneous records place him elsewhere. The absence of forensic or eyewitness linkage to Australia Day 1966 meant he couldn't be sustained as a suspect in the Beaumont disappearance.
Bevan Spencer von Einem is another name that surfaces in public discussion. He was convicted for the 1983 murder of a 15-year-old and implicated in several family murders. Some have pointed to a physical resemblance to the tall man and to his ties to Adelaide, but again, no forensic evidence, no confession. He died in 2025 without revealing new information. The list of possible suspects is long, but the evidence is thin.
Indeed. Von Einem's crimes and pattern of offending understandably invite scrutiny of unsolved historical cases, but speculation is not evidence. Without connecting material proof,
DNA, witnesses identifying him at the scene in 1966, or a confession with corroboration, one cannot move from suspicion to prosecution. Unfortunately, his death took any potential leads he might have offered off the table.
Another angle that captured public imagination was the involvement of psychics, most notably Dutch psychic Gerard Croiset, who came in November 1966. His visions suggested bodies buried in an old brick kiln and a warehouse near the Beaumont home. The public pressure led to demolition and excavation, funded by donations, but nothing was found, and Croiset's credibility suffered. That moment shows how desperate people were for answers.
Yes, public desperation can lead to extraordinary measures. The Croiset episode generated intense media attention and fundraising, but it also diverted resources and amplified hope that went unmet. It's a cautionary tale. Fringe methods sometimes get tried when conventional avenues stall, but they often produce more heartbreak than resolution.
Let's talk about the aftermath for the Beaumonts. Jim and Nancy endured decades of grief, hoax letters and phone calls, media intrusion and endless speculation. They never sought to profit from the case. They withdrew from public life and lived with the uncertainty. Jim died in 2019 and Nancy in 2023. Both passed without answers about their children. That human cost is central to why we revisit this case.
Absolutely. The human toll is profound. Families in missing person cases live with ambiguous loss. No body, no resolution, only suspicion and speculation. The Beaumonts experienced compounded trauma. The disappearance itself, the public spotlight, hoaxes like the letters, and the continual reopening of the case in the media. Their reluctance to exploit the case is an important part of their dignity.
And culturally speaking, the Beaumont disappearance is often cited as a turning point in Australia, the end of a certain innocence. After the mid-1960s, parental attitudes shifted. The idea of children roaming unsupervised began to change, and stranger danger entered parenting culture. The case didn't exist in a vacuum. It joined others like the Glenelg Beach murders and later Adelaide disappearances to reshape national perceptions of safety. Michael, from your historical perspective, how big was that shift?
It was significant. Before the Beaumont case, it was widely normal for kids to travel and play unsupervised. Afterward, parents, schools and communities became more cautious, and child protection attitudes hardened over the following decade. The Beaumonts' disappearance became part of the cultural wedge that introduced modern anxieties about public spaces and child safety. It also changed investigative expectations. Police had to consider the possibility of stranger abductions in daylight in busy places.
The case also fed a long public appetite for answers. Books, documentaries, podcasts, and periodic digs like the ones at Castelloy. Over time, the reward for information rose to $1 million. Police continue to list the case as open and occasionally re-examine evidence, re-interview witnesses, and follow new tips. But despite that, no remains, no charges.
Correct. Technological advances help. DNA testing, ground-penetrating radar, but they are only useful if there is recoverable physical evidence. In the Beaumont case, despite several major excavations and forensic reviews, nothing conclusive has been found. Investigative work continues, but the passage of time makes everything more challenging. Witnesses die or their memories fade, potential physical traces are lost, and suspects die without revealing information.
We should also address common misconceptions. First, the idea that the children ran away. There is no credible evidence for that. These were aged 9, 7, and 4, attached to parents with no planning or resources to vanish. Investigators regard the case as abduction and likely homicide. Second, the letters don't prove survival. They were a hoax. Third, despite popular claims, The case is not solved and no remains were found at Castaloy after multiple digs. We need to be clear about those facts.
Yes, clarifying what is established and what is not is crucial. Many people conflate speculation with evidence. The established facts include the children leaving for Glenelg on January 26, their sightings with a man, the bakery purchase with a pound note, and the subsequent absence of any confirmed sighting after around 12:30 p.m. Everything else, suspects, alleged links to other crimes, whispered confessions, remains unproven unless tied to evidence.
Sorry, Michael. Sometimes people ask why the Beaumonts didn't just have a memorial or public campaign. In fact, the family asked for no formal memorial at Glenelg. The beach itself has become, in a way, an unmarked memorial, a place that for many Australians evokes the case. That restraint is part of the family's request for privacy.
Yes, and it's a powerful form of remembrance. A site doesn't need a plaque to function as a memorial. For many locals and Australians who grew up with this story, Glenelg is a symbolic place of unresolved loss. The family's wish for privacy deserves respect. Public curiosity shouldn't override that.
We should also touch on the ethical responsibilities of storytellers and journalists here. This case calls for a victim-centred approach. Present who Jane, Arnna and Grant were as children. Avoid graphic speculation about their final moments and be cautious about recycling unproven allegations. We need to keep the dignity of the children and their parents front and centre.
Exactly. Ethical storytelling means distinguishing between established facts, reasonable inference, and pure speculation. It also means acknowledging the real people behind headlines. When cases are unsolved, it's tempting to fill the gaps with dramatic theories, but that risks harming families and undermining actual investigative leads.
Before we wrap, Michael, are there investigative threads or leads that you think remain important, given the source material and recent digs?
From the factual record, 3 threads persist as important: the eyewitness composite of the tall man and any corroborating contemporary records that might identify him, the financial anomaly of the £1 note used at the bakery and whether it can be connected to someone known to give such notes, and any material traces that might yet emerge from sites of interest through sensitive forensic searches. Each of those threads is constrained by time, but modern methods can still extract information from old evidence if it exists.
And the public can help by coming forward if they have credible, verifiable information. The reward remains substantial, and police continue to investigate credible leads. But we must stress credible, not rumour, not internet speculation.
Yes, credible, contemporaneous details matter most. A memory of specific conversation, a unique physical description, a receipt, a bank record. Those kinds of facts can give investigators something to test. Sensational claims without evidence only muddy the waters.
It's hard to end on certainty in a story like this, isn't it? The last confirmed sighting around 12:30 p.m, the bakery, the tall man, then silence. Jim and Nancy's lives forever altered. Glenelg Beach carrying the memory, the unanswered questions. Michael, any final reflections?
Only that cases like this remind us both of the limits of our knowledge and of the importance of careful, patient investigation. They also remind us of the social changes that can come from tragedy, shifts in parenting, policing, and public awareness. Most of all, we owe it to the Beaumont children and their family to maintain rigour, dignity, and restraint in how we remember and report.
Thank you, Michael. And for our listeners, the Beaumont case is still open. South Australian Police welcome credible information. If you have something that could be relevant, please contact them. For now, we keep the children in mind as people: Jane, Arnna, and Grant, not just names in a mystery. This has been Elena Ward with Dr. Michael Hanley. We'll return next week with another cold case, respectfully and carefully explored. Take care.